All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the Peace of Mind Ministry at Christ the Man Christian Fellowship. And we are going to be talking about, for the whole month of May, mental health issues and concerns that come up. So, last week we talked about anxiety, and tonight we will be talking about how to walk through grief and loss. So, before we get started, I'd just like to pray. And Father God, we just come to you right now and just thanking you, Lord, for your hands being upon our lives. Father, touch our minds. Give us a sound mind, Lord. Let us be able to walk with you and have the mind of Christ operating in our lives. Thank you, Father God, for binding up any doubt, fear, worry, anxiety, stress, or pressure that may try to come upon us and keep us from living out the life that you have for us to live, Lord God. Thank you for allowing us to have joy and gladness. And Father, I thank you right now for you binding up all the yokes and breaking all the chains that try to come and lock our minds down and let us not be able to operate in your perfect will that you have for our lives. Give us wisdom, Father God, in all that we do. Lord, let us have the mind that you intended for us to have, which is yours, the mind of Christ, operating on a daily basis. I break us free from any schizophrenia or bipolar or any mental attacks that have tried to come from generation to generation. Lord, I thank you that we are free from trauma and past childhood wounds right now. In the mighty name of Jesus, I thank you for deliverance and healing taking place as we go forth on this stream right now. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So, everyone, welcome and thank you for being here. And like I said, this is the Peace of Mind Ministry, PALM, at Christ the Man Christian Fellowship, where we are in the mental health field, counselors, social workers, nurse practitioners, and I think some, maybe even some psychiatrists may join us. I'm speaking that. So, anyway, tonight I am going to be talking to you about how to walk through grief and loss. We know all of us will experience some type of grief or some type of loss in our lives, especially here on earth, because we know we all will live and we know that we all will pass away and we all will die sometime. So, somebody that you know yourself will go through this walk, will have to walk out the grief and walk out the loss and the mourning that takes place. So, first thing I wanted to do is make sure that I just say this scripture because this is one of the scriptures that I stand on. And I'll talk about the importance of us all having scriptures that we stand on. And the scripture that I like when it comes to grief and loss, and I say a lot to my clients, is Psalms 30:5, which is weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. So we know that we will have tears, we will have sorrow, we will experience loss, we will experience mourning. We know these pains, this pain goes deep to the core and there takes time to recover. And so in counseling, when my clients come in who have lost a spouse or a child or a parent, sibling, a coworker, whoever it may be, their pet, gone through any type of divorce or relationship breakup, had to move from one city to a next and leave their family and friends behind. This can cause severe grief. For some of us, it's like, yay, I'm excited that I'm going to a city. For someone else, going to a new city by themselves and being alone can cause great depression and sadness. And you grieve the things and the family and the friends that you left behind. So, grief and loss are not only around death and dying, but they can be around, again, transitions that happen in life. For a parent, being very close to their child and that child leaves and goes off to college, that can cause some, and then you can experience loss of the relationship and the time that you have spent together. So people say, I cried like a baby when my child went off to school, or when I got married, I cried like a baby the first night I was with my spouse, and I shouldn't have been crying, but I missed my mom or my dad or my family because I had to move to another city. So people say, that's odd, but again, remember that we grieve a lot of different things, not just death, but we can grieve a number of different things. And I will go through the stages of grief tonight, as well as the different types of ways that we grieve and how it impacts our mind and our body. So, with that being said, tonight, a few things I want to do. So, I have a few objectives here, which, I thought, well, when I was thinking about this, like, how can I make sure we cover some things? So, a lot of people don't know the difference between grief, loss, and mourning. So I'm going to define those for you so you can understand when you're going through these phases. Am I dealing with grief? Am I in mourning? Or is this just loss? And not that they're linear at all. You can experience grief, loss, and mourning, and they're cyclical. You can go through one, go back through another, it start over again, it can end, and it can pick up a year or two later. Just because of where you are in that grief process and how long of a process you may be going through. So we say in counseling, take all the time you need when you're grieving. This is the one thing that we don't try and rush clients through. We don't say, oh, you can get over this, move forward, go on. Oh, you can get married again. Oh, you can have another child. Oh, don't worry about it. You'll make friends in that new city. No, we allow people to grieve and know it's okay because all of us are different and our grief processes are very different. And I'll explain that too. Knowing your grief cycle and how you grieve and how long you grieve with certain types of issues is very important because it'll help you with your recovery. And I'll get into that a little more just a little bit later. So understanding the difference between grief, loss, and mourning. Also, I will give you some strategies when you're going through your grief and your loss, just to help you cope in an appropriate way and a good way, and knowing again how grief and loss and mourning impacts your body. So we'll go through that so you can understand nothing is wrong with me. I'm just grieving. A lot of times people think I'm losing my mind or I'm going crazy. Something's not right. And no, you're just grieving. With anything that impacts the mind, understand no, it is just that. It's just, maybe an anxiety attack. And next time I'll know how to handle that better. This is grief and loss and mourning. And we're going to learn how to manage it well tonight. And I really look forward to your questions at the end. So please, please, please put them in the chat because we are here to help. We want to help as much as possible. I have Gwen tonight assisting with making sure we get to all the questions. So please put them in so we can help and make sure you get all your needs met tonight. So, what is grief? Just to start here, grief is just the deep sorrow that we experience with a loss. So, it's caused by death, right? So, when I've been married to someone for 15 years, 20 years, and suddenly they pass away, or I carry a child and that child passes away in utero or stillbirth, or if my child is 40 years old, that death has an impact on me. So I grieve it. So that's what grief is. When I'm grieving the death of something. So just knowing that first, grief is associated with death or the death of something, usually a person is caused by a death, but it could be now, people will grieve a relationship. It's like a death for them. And so it's extended beyond just a person, usually is how it's defined. But sometimes, I tell my people, you are grieving the loss of that relationship. You were married for 25 years and now you're divorced. So you will go through this grief phase and you will and be okay with it. The also with loss. So loss, this is where loss traditionally has been associated with a situation or a thing. So grief was the death of a person, and loss was traditionally losing someone or something. So that's the loss, right? So that's the difference in grief and loss. So losing someone or something. And so this is the emotional impact on my life or the investment that I had. So emotionally, I invested in that relationship for 25 years or 40 years and then it ended. Or my pet, I was emotionally invested in that. So I have with my pet, I love my pet like my child. My pet want me everywhere. And after 15 years, my pet passes away. So there is the loss with that. But then also that is a death. I grieve that death. So I'm grieving my pet, the death, and then I'm also dealing with the loss of the pet in that relationship. So the loss is associated with the relationship and all the things that go to relating to that pet, or even if it's a person. I always tell people when you're married for a long time, the research says it takes like just 2 years, 2.5 years, and it can take 2.5 years at minimum, but up to half of the time that you were with that person just to get over that person and be healthy enough to move into another relationship. So I always tell my clients after you go through a divorce, take 2 years off just to get to know you again, get to know who you are without that person, because that first year, you're going to go through a lot of grieving and mourning and sadness and experience loss. Then also, you have to get to know yourself. Who are you as an individual? Because you have lost that couple identity. There used to be your individual identity and maybe his or her individual identity, and then you had your couple identity. But now you're back to just that single individual identity of who am I now post marriage, post divorce, after the divorce. And so learning who I am first before I jump into another relationship. Yes, you feel lonely. Yes, you're sad, but you need to take time to grieve and heal before you enter another relationship. So that's loss. The last one, weeping and mourning. So, well, mourning. So when you're mourning, that is what the research says is like that deep crying and weeping and wailing. We hear in the Bible about wailing women, wailing men, wailing people at the wall, right? And that's the deep grief that they experience, and that sorrow or the sadness that comes out. That's the right. That's the deep well that it comes from deep in the soul, and you can hear it. You can hear it when someone passes away in the hospital. I remember hearing that audible sound that was just pain. I could feel the pain, and you can feel the pain of that person who's grieving at that time because they're in true mourning. And mourning, as people say, it goes deep to the core. You can hear it loudly and audibly. And people don't stay there in that space for like weeks or months. They go in and out of the mourning. So they might go in deep and be in there for 2 or 3 hours. And this is where they cry so much that they lose their voice. You can see that they're crying, but you don't hear anything because that's the silent. It goes inward. That's the inward cry that happens. That's the silent grief. They cried so much that they say, I'm cried out, or I cried so much I lost my voice, or I couldn't even speak, but I was still crying, but nothing was coming out. Maybe some of you have seen people who have been in that phase, and maybe some of you have even experienced it yourself. I know when my biological father passed away, I had this uncontrollable wail, and it was loud, and I couldn't maintain myself. Sitting on the front row, I had to excuse myself. I had to get up, walk outside, because I was wailing and I was mourning, and I knew what was going on. I was like, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to cause other people to lose it. So I went outside, and I was standing there, and I remember Benjamin was like, Shan, you got to pull it together. And I was like, but I was trying to pull it together, but I could not because I had been holding it together for so long for the rest of my siblings and the sake of my family to get through what we needed to do. As we all do, we know initially, okay, someone passes away, you have to go through these steps and these phases of, you got to call the funeral home, you have to make the plans, who's going to write the obituary, all those different things that were happening. So then in that moment in time was the time for me to release and let go. And I had my mourning and my wailing at that time. But, for others, my brother was looking like, oh my goodness, what's going on down there? And then he started crying. So I knew I was triggering. And we know that when you're grieving, especially when you're in the funeral home or wherever you're having the memorial service, you hear people wailing. You hear people mourning. Some people are very good and they contain themselves very well, and others seems like they're losing control. But it is a good thing. It is a healing thing, and we need to release it in order to move forward and to heal. So when you see that, I've had people say, man, they tried to jump in the casket with them, or, oh, they were rolling around on the floor, or they were hitting their hand on the table. So they are letting go and releasing the pain and the hurt of experiencing the loss of this person that they love so deeply and dearly. And some people really, truly feel like I cannot go on without this person in my life, whether it's mother, child, best friend, cousin, sibling. The pain goes deep. And so that mourning is real, and it needs to happen for some people to truly heal. So with that, let me go into the stages of grief. So most people know the regular traditional stages, and those are the ones that I'll mention now. So the first stage of grief is denial. So of course, when we hear so and so has passed away, or oh, they went through a divorce, or oh, her dog died, you're like, what? No, I cannot believe that's happening. What did you say? Oh my goodness, I cannot believe that is happening. I cannot believe this situation. So some people say they were married for 50 years. What do you mean they divorced? That makes no sense. They've been together that long. They should have just stayed married, right? So some things make no sense. And with grief and loss, it usually makes no sense. We try to prepare for it when we know someone. We may say, well, they lived a good life. They were 94 years old. But still, there's a loss and there's a grief, and people are like, I can't believe they're gone. Even though they know that they lived a long, good life, it's still painful and it still hurts. If you lose your nanny or your grandma or your papa, you're still in denial and can't believe that it happened. Right. So that's the first stage. It's denial. This is not happening. This isn't real. And how's it happening? And it usually lasts for most people anywhere from 3 to 7 days. For some, the longest that it says is 21 days, but on average it's 3 to 7 days, and then people move on. But for some people, it does take some time to get out of that denial phase, and 3 weeks, I'd say a month at the most, and then people move on to the next phase. Is that's where they become angry. So this is where people, they yell, they scream, and you may say, "Oh my goodness, they started swearing like a sailor," and they never swear because emotions run high and the grief goes deep, right? And it goes low into the core. And of course, that pain that's inside. And so things come out that usually we can maintain if we're a very calm. Like for me, I'm not a real big crier. I don't emote often, but when I'm in a deep place of pain, it comes. And people, my family say, when we see you cry, we cry because you don't cry that much. I don't know what it is, but it says my family says you trigger us. So when I realized I was about to trigger my siblings and my cousin, who I'm really close to, I was like, let me excuse myself so they can maintain their selves and I don't cause too much grief, although I did see them crying and I'm like, okay, we all need to grieve, but I don't want to my loss of control because I was losing control. So again, just knowing that when we go through the denial, we may be in shock and not accepting, and other people sometimes are triggered by us saying, no, that's not, I know it's not real. I can't believe it either. So again, we go through that denial phase and then we go into the anger, and then we get into the anger phase and we're really upset. We say things or do things to see abnormal. Um, I was talking to someone a few weeks ago who said like they were like, I'm not letting anybody in this hospital. Don't none of them, they don't deserve to be around my mother. When she needed them, they weren't there, right? So her anger, her hurt, like where were they when I told them that she needed help here or just such and such and such. So we all have heard some people who become very protective or they're upset. They won't let people into the hospital room. They won't let people come to the house. They have a list. You're acceptable and you're not. So again, and maybe later when they move out of that anger, they say, okay, you can come. Okay, you can come. And some people will go so far to say, you're not welcome at the funeral. Don't you come, right? Because they're upset with you or they're mad because of something. But usually, um, unless it's something that's been around for a long time, they will eventually allow other people to come, or that once they get through that phase. So once they get through the anger phase, then people go into bargaining. And so, but the bargaining phase is just that, where when you start bargaining, you say, well, I wish this would have happened. If this would have happened, then maybe this would be different, or maybe they would still be here, or if only I could talk to them one more time, I know, things would be different for me. Or so bargaining is just that. It's like, if this would happen, then this person would be here. If I could have only said that or done that, maybe things would be different. And sometimes people think, if I would have done something, I could have saved, them from passing away. So that's the bargaining phase. And then after bargaining, people usually go into the depression. So this is the fourth stage in the grief process that most people know from Kubler-Ross. And when you go into the depression phase, this is where it's just that you're sad. You're sad. You're crying. Upset stomach. May not eat. May not sleep. Constant thoughts of your loved one, or if it's like I said, a pet or that relationship, your mind continues to go back and forth through it. And trying to think what else, but well, ultimately it's just the sadness that comes upon. And so this is where, that as Psalms 30:5 says, the weeping may endure for a night, but joy does come. When you get through these phases, joy does come. You do feel better ultimately, but again, it takes time. It takes time when we're grieving. It's not a fast process. We can't rush through it. We can't push people through it. Again, I tell people, don't say things like, it's okay, you're going to get over it. When I know a couple of young ladies who lost their mom, and people were saying, how are you doing? How are you doing? And they were like, how do you think we're doing? Our mom just died suddenly. Our mom passed away suddenly. So again, we think like, if I just ask how you're doing, it's like we really know, but maybe coming up with something like, how can I help? Or what do you need? may I assist you in some way? So some other choice words instead of, oh, it's going to be okay. Because right now it doesn't feel like it's going to be okay. And a lot of my clients say that to me. I don't want people asking me, how am I doing, or telling me it's going to be okay. Because right now I don't feel like that it's going to be okay. And I don't want you to come over and tell me, it's gonna, just keep moving forward, press through it, push forward, because I don't want to push right now. So allowing people to sit in the grief is okay. Allowing people to cry, and don't say stop crying or no, no, no. The crying is good. They're called healing sorrow tears. The tears that you cry when you're grieving, they actually heal the body from the inside out. So just knowing that when people are sad and they're depressed and they're in the depressed phase, it's okay. Let them cry and be okay. Just be present and sit in the silence. That's one thing that's hard for people to do, is just sit and be present and let people cry. So I always say, when my clients come in and they've lost a child or a spouse, or a relationship has ended, and they just are crying, they're like, I'm sorry. I'm like, don't apologize. You need to. It's a good thing to do. And I sit and I'm quiet and I allow them the space to grieve. So be okay if you're helping or assisting a family member, friend. Just allow them to be in that space and moment. And sometimes when you give a person a tissue or you go tap or touch them, you stop the process. So kind of read the person as well. And even for yourself, if you're crying and the tears are just flowing, just let them flow. Sometimes wiping them away can help stop you from going through your phase appropriately. So the depression phase and the anger phase are where people usually stay the longest, and they vacillate back and forth between anger and sadness, or anger and depression. Those two phases people go in and out of, sometimes for years. And that's okay. Again, remember, with grief, you need to take all the time you need to allow yourself to get to the place where you feel, finally, I'm whole and I can move forward. The last phase is acceptance. So how do we get to this phase? Well, we go through those stages, and then we get to acceptance. Now, Kubler-Ross is the one that most of us know and are familiar with, but there are a lot of other stages. Some people go through guilt before they get to acceptance. Some people try to justify behavior. Some people, you just experience so many emotions. So none of these are linear. You don't just go through them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You go in and out, back and forth, around. I tell everybody it's cyclical. They're not stages, they're statuses. So statuses you can go in and out of, and up and down and all around. So just know that you can feel okay and feel like, okay, I'm in a place where I can accept it. And then something triggers it. You can hear a song like I did years ago when I was dealing with the loss of my grandfather, and it triggered me. And I was thinking, yeah, I thought I was good, but then I just had this crying again. So knowing that ultimately we do get to the place where we accept the loss, but it may take some years. And so now I'm going to go into the loss timeline. And so this is where I tell people, understand that there's nothing wrong when you're dealing with loss and you're going through this timeline. So the first thing is, wait a minute, let me first go back. I think maybe I want to go somewhere else first. No, let's go here. So when we're dealing with the loss and our timeline, just know when people deal with loss, there are different timelines for the loss. So they're also what's the word I want to use? Priority, or like one is more important than the other, or more difficult than the other. I'm having a loss of word here. So the first one is the most severe. That's it, severe. The most severe loss that anyone can experience is the loss of a child. And most of us probably know why, because that is not the natural order of things, right? The parent is supposed to pass away before the child. That's what we think. And that's what we know. We think I'll live to be 103 and my child will live, longer than me, or I will pass away before my child passes away. I'll live to be 90 and I will pass, and then my child will be here after I pass and they will bury me. That's what we think. So when the natural order is disturbed or it happens out of order, then we experience grief. So it's the most severe loss in life on the timeline, as far as the loss timeline is concerned, and it is the most difficult one to recover from, is the way I guess I'll say that. So, and that's because the loss of a child on average takes 9 to 11 years to get to acceptance. So think about, I go through the anger phase. So a lot of people stay in the denial phase, and the anger phase initially. So during that time when they're in denial and anger, a lot of clients, even Christian or not, are like, I'm angry at God, I'm mad at God. Why would He let this happen? Why to me? Why to my child? They didn't deserve it. They did nothing wrong. Why did my child have cancer and have to die at 7? Or why did my child have the aneurysm? Or why did my child get shot? So again, my child is young and innocent, and this isn't right. And even if again, an adult child, 50, and the parent may be 70, again, this makes no sense. I don't understand it. I'm upset. I'm hurt. So when people say they're angry at God, have to say it's okay. And it is okay to be angry at God. It's okay to be hurt and upset and not want to accept what has happened. But eventually people move out of that anger stage. Remember, it's the second stage in the grief and loss process. They'll go into some bargaining. Well, God, why didn't you tell me I could have did this or I could have did that? Or Lord, maybe if only this had, again, being okay knowing that people go through that phase, the anger phase, and then they'll go into the sadness phase. Maybe they stay in anger phase for 2 years and they go into sadness for 3 or 4 years. Then they might just go back and might go into denial again. So again, it's not linear, it's cyclical. And so usually most of my parents that I have worked with, they're in their grief and loss. They go through the stages for about 6 years. What I found is, even though the research says 7 to 9, most of my clients are at about year 6 before they say, okay, I feel like I can breathe again. I feel like, I can get to the place where now I don't cry just about every night. I feel like I can get out of bed. Some of my clients will stay in bed for the first 3 or 4 months, and maybe they can work and maybe they cannot. And I usually tell them that, hey, I know you're not feeling well, and I know, you don't want to get up. I just need you to at least get up, shower, brush your teeth, and then you can get back in the bed if you need to. Because again, this is the most severe loss that anyone can experience in life, is the loss of a child. And I tell people no one's going to understand that loss or that grief or that pain unless they've walked it out. So that's why mothers, who help other mothers who have experienced the loss of a child. It's the best thing ever. Dads, for other dads who have experienced loss, it's the best thing ever. They tell me that that's the best help that they receive. So if you have experienced loss of a child, connect with another parent who has experienced that same loss. The next one is the loss of a spouse or a loss of a parent. Those timelines are the same. So the research says for the loss of a spouse or the loss of a parent, it takes 7 to 9 years, so just a little less. So, and it's not a true science. So they give you +or -2. So 9 to 11, +or -2 for kids. So it could be up to 13, or it could be as less as 7. Same thing, 7 to 9 for the loss of a spouse or the loss of a parent, +or -2. So know that when someone loses their parent, again, they could lose their parent when they're 19 or they're 12, or they could lose their parent when they're 70. They're still going to go through that same space. They may lose their parent when their parent is 94. Again, they're still going to go through these same stages. They're still going to vacillate in and out of stages: anger, sadness, hurt, bargaining, and then ultimately get to acceptance. So if someone says my mother passed and she was 90, I don't say, well, she lived a great life and you should be okay and thank God for that. No, I say, I understand your loss and I'm here to help you walk through it. What do you need? How can I help? You know? And if it is, I just need a place to vent because my family's telling me to move on, or I need a place to cry, I need a place to talk about her. And we actually go through the grief and the stages of grief and loss and go through the homework. There's a homework primer that I use that gives some handouts to help process the grief appropriately. So again, knowing that it doesn't matter the age of the parent, I'm still going to grieve and give me my space, and if you need it and you've lost your parent or your child or your spouse, take the time that you need, take all the time you need. Make sure that you are allowing yourself to grieve, and don't let anyone try to push you or rush you through it and tell you that you need to move forward. I'm going through this timeline just with the grief and death because of COVID and the losses that people have had between spouses, children, siblings, cousins, brothers. Again, all of it. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time here explaining why, during COVID. So this has kind of changed things as well because we didn't get to have the funerals like we usually get to have, where everybody comes together. We see all the family. It might have just been you and 40 people, or at first I think it was 20, then it went to 50. Now I think we're back where we can have regular, funeral services. I'm not sure, but I know I went to a few and there was 50 at one and it was social distance outside. Then I went to another one and it was inside, but there was a limited number and we had our masks. So, and touching and hugging were not allowed. And we know that when people are grieving or hurt, they need a hug, they need a touch, they want to be, um, held. And so we couldn't do that. And so therefore that grief is different and it sometimes it compounds it's not compounded but it's locked inside of us and we need a release, right? So some people heal through touch, and so and with grieving a lot of people touch, and so when we can't do that, then that's a part of the healing that is taken away or that is lost. And then so people now are like happy, like I'm glad we can have funerals like we used to, or I can have a wake or memorial service and I can hug someone or touch someone or cry on someone's shoulder. So that's a good thing. The next loss are siblings and close friends. So the research says 5 to 7 years for a sibling. But what I found is that if the sibling is a twin or it's a sibling that you were really tight and that sibling is not just your friend, but your best friend, then you can add on about 3 years. So, instead of 5 to 7, it could be 10. I've had some twins, I've had some sisters who were really close, and they're just like, a piece of me is gone. And I even know some women who they're like peas in a pod. They're like a year or two apart. And if one goes out of the country, the other one goes with her. They eat off each other's plate. They're married. They do everything with their spouses and their kids together. They love each other dearly. And they're like, I don't know what I would do without her. When she said she was moving out of the state, I cried. And then when she got transferred back home, I rejoiced. So again, know that if you lose somebody who you're so close knit with, and it could be a coworker, when I go into companies and, I went into a company once years ago and this man had worked there for like 50 years and then he retired and then they asked him to come back. He started at like 18 or something like that. They asked him to come back. He was supposed to retire at like, I think it was a certain age. He came back and he said, I would love to die here. I love this place so much that I would love to take my last breath here, right? He had told somebody that. Well, it ended up he went out, went to the restroom and collapsed and passed away there. But the thing that they were like, it looked like he was smiling, and he was like in his 80s or something. But they said he just looked so happy and peaceful when he passed. And he passed right here. And he had told us when he passed away, he wanted to be here. So, for some of them, they're grieving and mourning, but they said, he looked like he was so happy. So again, their loss, and this man has been in their lives for 50 plus years. So he was like a dad to some, he was a friend to some, he was godfather to some. So again, co-workers can become just like family members and friends. So people say, I have my work wife and I have my work husband or my work sister, my work brother, right? In order to language about them in that way, it must be somebody that you feel great being around. So if they were to suddenly be gone, pass away, or car accidents happen, things, just tragedies happen, then your life changes, it shifts, and then you have this void that's there. And so with that, I'm going to go into some of the biblical mourning, and then I'll go into some of the other parts of what happens here. So let me get my note here. Um, so I just want to talk about when we talk about biblical mourning, some of the things that happen there. Okay, so when we're looking at mourning as far as the Bible is concerned, there's one thing I tell all of my clients is that, remember, in the Bible, I took a training years ago on and from the Christian Counseling Association on grief and loss, and it just amazed me. And this was probably about 15 or 20 years ago. And in the Bible, they had a year off to mourn, to grieve, to cry, the loss of a loved one. And so they said he said they put on sackcloth and ashes, and everybody knew if they saw that person to leave them alone. Let them just be with their grief. Let them just sit in it. Let them just cope with it. And they said on average, it took about a year for them to get to a place where they were better. So my thought is, because we only get 3 days, right? Now for bereavement, you go to work, they say, oh, you have 3 days. And after 3 days, we want you back at work. Well, if we had a year off to just grieve the loss of our loved one or that relationship that ended or that pet that we lost, maybe it wouldn't take 11 years for the loss of a child. It wouldn't take 7 years for the loss of a parent or a spouse. It wouldn't take, 5 years for the loss of a sibling or a coworker, because we would have a year to just sit with our grief, mourn, learn how to get through it, allow ourselves to cry, be angry, not eat, not sleep, not shower, not brush our teeth, to do whatever we needed to do to grieve. And so I think that's the difference in how people recovered biblically, okay, because they had a year off to do nothing. If I want to sit in the corner and rock and cry, people wouldn't say, "Oh my goodness, she done lost her mind. Oh my goodness, she's not healthy. Something's wrong with her. She's losing it. We need to get her help." They would have just left me alone and said, "She's grieving. We can see she has the sackcloth on. She has her ashes on. So we're just gonna, pray and keep it moving, right?" Well, now after 3 days, I got to get myself together, put my makeup on, brush my teeth, shower, and go back to work. So work is not, helping us to grieve. And then for us to say, be strong, you have to be strong, pull yourself up, shake it off, move on. No, no. When I've had a couple of girlfriends who have lost children, and I told them, hey, I need you to take at least 3 months off work. I need you to stay at home and allow yourself to grieve. And they were like, no, I got to go to work. And one called and said, you're right. I went back to work. I was a mess. I cried all day. I was in the bathroom. I was in my car. I need to stay off. Call your doctor. Get the FMLA paperwork, the Family Medical Leave Act. That's what it's for, family medical leave. They can't fire you. They can't let you go. I mean, if your company has that in place, if they don't, get your medical doctor when you've lost someone that you love dearly, or the relationship is causing you to not be able to function. That's okay. Even with the loss of a pet, some people cannot function well after they lost their pet for a few days, or maybe, sometimes the research says up to 21 days. So it's okay, again, to take that time off. Take care of you. Self-care is always the best care. And so, take the time off if you need it, to take care of you when you lose your loved one. Don't push yourself to move too quickly, because again, you can cause yourself to go through the not the best grief. So we have what's called good grief and bad grief. And so you can go through good grief, which is where I take the time that I need to get myself together. I don't push myself to go back in 3 days. If I know I'm not doing well, I accept that. I accept that this grief goes deep. This grief is resting on me, and I'm okay with it. I feel a little heavy right now because I'm in mourning. That's okay. I'm grieving. That's okay. I'm experiencing the loss. And I take the time that I need to take care of myself. Or, I get the FMLA paperwork, and I'm okay with that. And it's okay to get the FMLA paperwork. So I just want to say that. So think about that when you're going through grief. And if it's a mom, dad, I know with my father, I came home, I took off a month. I just sat at home. I took myself through it. I thought I was okay. I had two little kids. I went back to work to see clients part time. Then one day I heard this song that came on that reminded me of my father, and I was a mess. I came back home, took off another couple of weeks. I'm like, I know what I need to do to take care of me. And I know my grief cycle. And that's something I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. The next thing is, when we are in mourning, there are a lot of different ways in the Bible days. People mourned a lot more, right? So they had this heavy loss, this heavy grief. The mourning came out, right? So again, remember, that's the deep wailing. And we even know that still today, people go sit at the wall, they wail, they have a time of wailing and mourning, right? And they're there for days, months, weeks, however long they need. So still, in the US, we don't get to take that time to go unless you schedule to go over to, you know, um, Israel to mourn and grieve and go to the Wailing Wall. So, with that, again, making sure that we understand that when we are grieving, and then that grief, if it goes into a mourning phase, it's okay. It's okay to just, again, like my one client that was like, I just can't function. A lot of my clients, mothers and fathers who've lost a child, they cannot function for a while. And that's okay. It's okay to say, I'm just going to stay in this bed. But like I said, after a while, I tell them, good grief is, I understand I'm grieving, but I at least after like the first couple of weeks, I tell them at the most, I give them a month to not shower, brush their teeth, or bathe. And then I say, now I need you to get up and just a little bit of movement. You can do that. And then get right back in the bed if you need to. But we got to, get you to the place where I'm functioning well, because good grief is accepting I'm going through the phases, and I still have to do a little bit to take care of me so that my mental health doesn't deteriorate and I have a bad situation, or go into a deep depression, or have a really bad nervous breakdown, right? And so good grief is that phase. Bad grief is I don't do anything for months. I don't eat. I don't sleep really well. I don't wash. I don't, if it's, we know when someone's functioning well and when they're not. And if your family says, hey, you haven't bathed in 6 months, you haven't ate, you've lost 40 pounds and you're not sleeping, and we hear you crying all day and all night, that's not good grief. So we have to go in and out of the phases. So knowing that, and so people will mourn even over the sins, like in the Bible days, we know people mourned and cried over the sins. We saw David, right, when the baby was getting ready to be, the Lord said, "Hey, that baby's not going to live. It's not going to make it." He knew he had committed a lot of sins. He, had her husband killed, and put him on the front line so he could be murdered. Took the wife, had an affair with the wife. The baby was coming because of the affair. So there were some things, some sins he had done, and of course he felt bad about it. He wanted the Lord to forgive him for those sins and let that baby live. And so he was mourning and crying for the baby, but I'm pretty sure for the sins as well. And there's a lot of other people in the Bible that I could mention, but I really do want to get through a little bit more of this information. But knowing that we will mourn for some of our own sins out of our guilt and out of the things and shame and embarrassment, but we have to let that go and release that to God, because He said He puts it in the sea of forgetfulness. So we have to too let it go so we can grieve well and be okay. Um, let's see. Let me go on to what mourning can do for us when biblically, it says that when we mourn, it helps us align our hearts to God's heart, right? So when we really go into that deep wailing and that deep crying and we release it with the biblical mourning, we draw closer to God's heart. And so sometimes people will tell me, like, I had the best cry and I was rocking and I was wailing and I was screaming and crying out to the Lord to heal me and help me. And I felt this presence come, and I felt so much better after I was crying for an hour and I was just wailing and screaming. And so it draws us closer to God. So again, I tell people, when you need to yell, scream, cry, let it go. Don't hold it in. I remember telling my son when my mother-in-law passed away, he was like, I'm good, I'm good. But he was so close to her and they were like peas in a pod. So I told him, I said, I need you to go outside and just scream at the top of your lungs. And he went out there because he hadn't cried, he hadn't mourned, he hadn't wept. He went out there and yelled so loud, you could just hear it all over the place. And then he just broke. I heard him, "Ah," and I was like, thank you, God. Like, he had to release it, right? He's man, I'm strong. And so that's one thing I tell my men. It's like, no, it's not like you're weak. Nobody's saying you're weak because you cry, because you scream or yell, or you're in mourning. Release it. And I have some come in my office and I'm like, let it go. And they scream and they cry. And I've had people say, are you okay? I'm okay. Now he's okay. So again, men, it's okay to scream. It's okay to let your kids see you cry. It's okay to accept that I'm in pain. And part of my healing and getting through my pain is my grief. So mourning is good. Mourning is good. Grieving is good. Letting people know I'm experiencing loss, but I'm going to be all right. But I'm going through this process of healing and I'm okay. The word of God says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And that's Matthew 5:4. So again, just making sure that like always, that God is with me and He is definitely going to comfort me. He's healing me. I'm going to be okay. We think sometimes I can't make it through this, but the word of God says He never puts on us more than we can bear. So if we are going through it, we're going to be all right, because he said we have the strength and we're able to bear it as long as we allow Him to come in, we release it to Him, allow Him to carry it. But He never puts on more than we can bear. He never puts more on us than we can bear, right? So we can handle it. We just got to realize I got to dig in and go deep, and I don't give up. I keep fighting, and I will be okay once I get through this phase or this grief. So a couple more things I'll say, and then we'll start with some questions. Effects on the mind. So I said I wanted to talk about that. And there are different effects that the grief, loss, and mourning have on the mind. So our thoughts constantly go to the person, and that's normal. So we think about our loved one. People tell me, I thought I saw them in my dreams. I talked to them in my dream. They came to me to my dream. They comfort me. I woke up and I saw them standing in the hallway. So people will say different things. So what happens is, because they have been a part of your life, the body and the mind, and I'm going into the senses, which is on the next slide or next page that I have here. But the mind fills in the gaps until, because it's used to seeing that person every day and talking to them every day, so it brings them up, right? The mind is like, what's happening? I used to see you every morning because we were in the bed together, right? We lived together. I was married to you for 25 years, and all of a sudden you're not here. So it will make you hear the person and see the person. Also, parents will say, I think I saw my child walking down the street. That person looked like them. We do that a double take, like, I think I saw my father. I think I saw my daughter. I think I saw, because the mind is the gaps are there and it's trying to fill it in with what it knows. So that's where you start to think about them. You think you see them, and it's trying to help you heal because it's grieving, right? Your mind and your body grieves. So then we have memories that come up. Same thing. Those are your thoughts in your mind. So the memories of that person, you hear a song, you see something, you look at a picture. So memories come back and they flood you. And that's it's not people say, I don't want to think about them. I don't want to talk about them. That's bad grief. The fastest way to heal always is through talking. And with grief, it is telling stories about your loved one. So I tell my clients, tell me about your favorite memory. Tell me about the time you were mad at them. Tell me about, the funniest thing they've ever done. Tell me what you want the world to know. So it comes from sharing and telling stories about your loved one. And it heals your heart. It heals your mind. People say it feels bad, but then they're like, later I thought about it and I was laughing and I felt better. But in the moment, it feels heavy. But as time goes on, it lightens and you can tell the story without the tears or without the heartache or whatever it may be. And so then there's conscious, and then there's reason, and there's mental health. So when you go through the good grief, I'm going through these a little faster for sake of time, but when you go through them, you're conscious and you're reasoning, your thoughts and this is why this happened, this is why that happened. It helps you to process through um, the different phases of your thoughts, right? When you're going through grief and you're going through the loss in the morning. So when you do this the right way, it improves your mental health. A lot of people don't know that when I go through grief and I talk about my love, when I talk about my experiences and I share different things that happen throughout the timeline of life with them, their lifeline and their timeline with me, it helps me to heal in a good way. So talk, 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 share stories with any and everybody. I remember telling my kids, I made a memory book of my dad, and then I told my kids, like, whenever you want to know anything, let me know. I'll pull the book out. And one time my son came when he was 10 and he was like, Mom, can you tell me about Grandpa Clarence? And I said, sure. He's like, can we get the book? And I was like, because I knew the book had all these pictures, all these, words I put in there. I knew it might be a little bit painful for me, but I needed him to see that it's okay to cry. It's okay to smile and laugh when you're talking about the person. It's okay. I said, here I am with a little girl with my first bike that he bought, here, and, here's this, here's that. So different things. But again, there were healing. They were healing tears there, healing the sorrow and helping you go on. So the next thing is when you go through grief and loss with a parent, a parent or a child, anyone like that, you have these things that happen as far as the mental. Hold on, I just lost my page here. So when you go through it, you have this phase where things happen with the mind, and then also I said the body. So when you go into the body, their senses, what you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, are impacted. And so when you're dealing with the loss, I said already how you see the person, right? You think you see them. The mind tries to fill in the gaps. The body does the same thing. So you can sense the person. People say, I thought I smelled them walking. I thought I smelled their scent in the house or in the mall or in the car. Sometimes you really do, because some people will take and they will keep a hat or keep a sweater or keep the favorite cologne or the baby's blanket. So you do. People will sniff them as well and smell the person because they feel closer to them. That's normal. People say, that's crazy. They walking around with a baseball cap, such and such. No, it's normal. So, know that it's okay to have something to remember the person by. I have a jewelry box my father made. I have a couple of paintings that he had made for me, art, and they're still in my house to this day. And when I look at them, I smile. And I love my jewelry box. It's an old wood jewelry box, but I love it. It's like, this is mine. This is a memory that I have. Wanted something from him. So when it comes to people talking about my heart really hurt. My heart is aching. That is true, and the heart does hurt because, again, the heart has memory. Remember when a baby is born, they take the baby out, put it on the mom's chest, skin to skin contact, baby heart beat. It smells the mom smells the baby, they connect. that heartbeat. They begin to, the research says that couples who've been together a long time, if they lay together, skin to skin contact, that eventually their hearts begin to beat in rhythm. The same thing happens with kids and their moms. The hearts begin to beat in rhythm. So think about, your child comes and lays on you, and they come and they cuddle with you, or you snuggle with your spouse, or you snuggle with your mom or your dad or your sister. Your little, y'all sleep in the bed together. When you're adults, you travel together and you still sleep in the bed together. There's a rhythm, there's a connectedness. And so when that person is gone, the heart is like, where are you at? I'm searching for you. I'm missing you. I need you. And the heart aches. And it's like, I missed that heartbeat. Where's my heartbeat? Where's my sister's heartbeat? Where's my husband's heartbeat? Where's my child's heartbeat? Right? You can have three or four other kids, but that heartbeat is specific to that child. That spouse is specific to them. So everybody, we have these rhythms, and the heart aches and it does hurt. So when people say that, and people say, what? That's true. As well as, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. If you went to a restaurant with that person, you could grieve. I don't want to go to that restaurant anymore. If the person died on Christmas, Thanksgiving, around the holidays, around your birthday, on your birthday, you grieve and you're sad. And those things, some people are like, I don't celebrate Christmas. I don't do Thanksgiving. I don't do Valentine's. I don't do. And then, oh, that's okay. And for a season, they may not. But eventually, the research says with time, when they heal, they will be able to celebrate those holidays again. But again, bad grief, you get stuck in a phase, and you may not, I'm not doing that for 15, 20 years. You're stuck. So you need help to get you unstuck so you can get back to living well, because your loved one probably would want you to celebrate those holidays again, and celebrate them on the holiday sometimes. So people don't sleep. They feel like their dreams are interrupted, or the person is coming to them in their dreams. And sometimes they're dreaming, sleeping, trying to see and engage with their loved one. Nausea comes in, lack of focus. And then the most important, the last two I'll talk about. And then if we have any questions, we'll go into that, are the anniversary date. So we all have an anniversary date of a loved one who passed away, a relationship that ended, or loss of a pet, right? Move to a new city, whatever it is that caused you to experience GLM, grief, loss, or mourning, right? So what happens is, when that comes around, the research says, just like wedding dates and birthdays and celebratory things, well, when we're grieving, the body goes through a cleansing for the next 2 to 3 years. So the first 3 years, that's why I tell my clients, the first 3 years are always the hardest when it's a death. And because the first anniversary dates are always the hardest. This is the first Christmas, the first Thanksgiving, the first birthday, the first Mother's Day, Father's Day, whatever it is, without this person. And so therefore your body goes through this sadness, depression, the anger. It goes right back through the stages of grief. And then you get to a place of acceptance. And maybe 3 or 4 years later, you accept that this person is not here on the holidays anymore. But that takes time. So be okay with that. Also, the anniversary date of the actual passing of the person and the funeral are really difficult. So when you have those dates, the research says like a year before, a week before, the week of, or the week after is when you're most likely to have this heaviness and this pain and have a serious grief, and maybe even go back through mourning. So, so people wake up saying, oh my goodness, this week I've just been so tired and sad, and I've been crying and I don't know why, or I can't focus and I haven't been able to eat, or I have diarrhea and I don't know what's going on. It's your grief. So it's a cleansing. So the body wants to cleanse and heal. So it realizes, I've missed this person for a whole year. So that next year or the year after that, it goes through a cleansing. So I tell people it may be 2 or 3 years and you might still go through the cycle, but chart it on your calendar. Look on your calendar and say, oh, this is the week that my mom passed. So the week before, the week after, that week, I might go through a cleansing cycle and a grief cycle, right? For the anniversary day. The last thing is knowing your true grief cycle. For some of us, we don't know how we grieve or how long we grieve. Knowing how long you grieve and how you grieve is very important. So I know for me, and I can only talk about me, my experience when my father passed, the first 2 weeks, I was in some, I had this like, oh my goodness, let me go to work, let me do things, let me figure out what's going on. But when I initially got the call that my father passed away, those first 3 days, I was in mourning. I was sick to the stomach, I had diarrhea, I couldn't eat. I lost probably about 5 to 7 pounds. So I knew the first 3 days were difficult. Then I jumped into go to work, right? Let's handle some things. Let me help, see what I can do. Then it was delayed because of that. Then I went into another mourning phase, and then I went into grief. So when my grandfather passed, I immediately went into grief for about 2 weeks. Then I went through that phase, and then at once the funeral, we actually had the funeral like maybe a week or so later, and I saw how my mom and my uncles were grieving. It impacted me again, and then I went into this mourning phase and a grief phase. So I realized my grief cycle is about 3 weeks, 3 weeks to a month, where it's heavy. Then I'm better. I usually will lose about 5 pounds, 5 to 7 pounds. I don't weigh too much anyway, so I can't really afford to lose much more. Thank you, Lord, for keeping the weight on. So, so you want to know, do I lose weight? Do I not sleep? Do I get sick? Do I overeat? What is my grief cycle? And usually your grief cycle is the same, whether it's a loss, a death, that's the grief. If it's a relationship, if it's a pet, if it's a transition in your life, loss of a job, you're going to grieve, but know your grief cycle. If nothing else, from everything I've said tonight, please learn your grief cycle and learn how you grieve, because then you'll know when you're coming out of it. With my dad, after about 7 months, I felt better. Um, in and out. Do I still have, were there still times early on where I still grieved him and I felt sad? Yes, I was still in a grief, but I didn't have the heaviness. With my grandfather, I was really close to him. So the first 3 years were difficult. They were very hard. But then after that, I felt better. So knowing, it depends how close you are to a person, how far away. I was closer to my grandfather than my father, both of my grandfathers than my biological father. And so that grief was a little longer and it lasted a little longer. And it's okay. But knowing how close you are to someone or how distant you are from them may also impact how you grieve and how long you grieve. So with that, I gave you some ways to heal and walk through. I'll say two more things. I'm running out of time here. If you can get into worship, the research says 7 minutes or more of just listening to worship music, it does. It changes the brain. It heals the brain. It heals the heart. It heals the body. So when my clients are mourning, I say, please make sure that you spend time in worship. Just listen to the words of the song. Cry out to God. Let Him hear you. Grieve, cry, yell, let your anger come out, go through the phases and be okay with it. And know you'll feel much better afterwards. Get your 3 scriptures. I always tell my clients 3 scriptures a day to stand on around healing from grief and loss. And if you can, an accountability partner to talk through your grief. There's a book called the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's the best thing. You have an accountability partner. You talk through this book with them. You work through the pages, and here it is right here, the Grief Recovery Handbook. Little thin book, but it tells you to create a timeline, whether it's a death of a loved one, it's a relationship you're recovering from, or it's the loss of a pet. You go to that section and you have a partner and you work through it together. The partner just listens as you talk about your loved one or the pet or the relationship. They're not trying to be the counselor, they're just there present to listen again, so you can tell the story and you can talk it through. So with that, we only have like 3 minutes left. I hope the information was good. If there are any questions, we can go through them. Let me see here. I'll try and find questions. And hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Are the 4 stages of grief always in that order for everyone? So no, the stages of grief are not, they're not linear. They're like cyclical. You can go in and out. Usually people have that initial shock. So that shock or the denial, like, I can't believe this happened, or no, that didn't happen. That usually starts it. But some people can start out, they become very sad and they go to anger, then they go to bargaining. So you can jump around the stages. And like I said, there are a lot more now that have developed, but most people know those 5 stages. That's why I mentioned those. But now there's about 12 of them. So just learning and knowing for yourself, am I a person that stays in anger longer, or do I stay in grief? Do I stay in sadness longer when I'm going through my grief cycle? But most people vacillate between anger and sadness. And then they get the acceptance. Most parents will they stay in anger for about 2 or 3 years, and then they'll stay in the sadness for about 3 to 5, and they'll overlap. So it's not linear. Is it possible to go through experience more than one phase of grief at the same time? So sometimes people can have compounded grief, and I'm making sure, let's see, is it possible to go experience more than one phase of grief? Yes. Yeah, so sometimes you can have compounded grief. Like, let's say I've lost 3 or 4 people, especially now during COVID. I know someone who lost a mom, a dad, and a sibling, right, just to COVID at different times. And so the grief is compounded. It's there, and they're going through, maybe anger about this one or sadness about this one. So you can experience different emotions each day. You wake up, you can start out feeling happy, then you might feel sad and angry, then you might feel okay. And then tomorrow you could be angry, and then in the afternoon you're depressed, and then the next day you're bargaining. So yes, you can have more than one at the same time. So, and I think we have just about a minute left. Um, and thank you all for being here, and I hope the information was helpful. And if you have any more questions or anything, you can always, if you want to email me, it's like asoundmind@yahoo.com. So ASNDMND at yahoo.com. I know this was a lot of information in a short period of time. So again, ASNDMND at yahoo.com. So thank you all for being here. And next week, we will be back. We have talked about anxiety. We've talked about grief. Next week, we will talk about fear. And then the final week, we will talk about depression. Bye.